In this episode, we'll take a look at the creative things you can do with a single point RGB light like the new Aputure 600C Pro. Now, this is not really a review. It's more of a demo of a couple of the things that I use a light like this for. This is the Aputure Lightstorm 600C Pro. It's a single point light with a Bowens mount, so you can put all sorts of different light modifiers on it. And in fact, in this case, we are using the 600C Pro to do our background here, which you see, and we're using the spotlight mount with that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So before we get started, let me just kind of lay the groundwork here. The 600C Pro is one of the 600 Pro series from Aputure. These are their bigger LED single point lights. And what makes this one different from the 600X, which we reviewed just a while back, is that this has RGB. It does the colors that you're seeing on the background right now, in addition to cool to warm light. So if you're going to use it as a key light, you can do that as well. Very versatile. You can do almost anything with this particular light, and it's quite powerful at over 600 watts of output for an LED. So let's, instead of kind of going through all of the details here, I do have another review of the 600X Pro up here or down in the description, depending on whether you're watching this on mobile or desktop. And you can go take a look at that for kind of the nitty-gritty details, and then I'll call out some of the differences with the color version here. So first up, here is a summary of some of the features of the LS600C Pro. It's a pro level light, of course, when you consider the price, which is $2,490 US. And I would say go ahead and pause the video here if you want to kind of dive into the specs and see what all is on offer here from this light. And then over here, we have the color quality and output photometrics I measured with my Seikonic C800. Pause if you want to jump into the details, but in short, I can say that this light performs really well in terms of color quality and output. Now, a couple of things I want to cover really quickly. First of all, one of the things that really excites me about this light is, first of all, you can actually set the color space that you want to use when you're generating the colors for your filming session. Super, super helpful. So, for example, if you want to do something in the Rec 2020 color space, you can set it to that. It can't produce all of those colors, but a surprising number of them. And then, of course, if you're going to do something more in the sRGB space, you have settings for that as well. So you can go ahead and set those and contain it within there so that when you're filming, you're not running into these situations where you're projecting a light that your camera's not going to be able to capture for that particular piece. So that's really, really helpful. Also, you can, of course, use this as a key light if you're going to be using something more in the white spectrum. So all the way down to the very warmest tungsten colors, well above regular daylight colors. So this light can pretty much do anything you need it to do. I also really like that it has a green and magenta balance. So what that means in practical terms is every LED light generally has some sort of kind of variance in terms of a green to magenta on the spectrum. And what this balance adjustment allows you to do is match pretty much any light that you're working with. So another really useful feature. Now, one note, the fan in this light is not silent. This is a big light. It is beefy, it's heavy. You can see that with the connections on the different cables. It is a beefy light. And to cool a beefy light, you need a bigger fan. And so I don't really see this as a major issue. Normally, I'm very careful about that, but let me just explain my perspective on this. It's a bigger fan because it's a bigger light that it has to cool that's generating a lot more heat. But because it's a bigger light, it's not the type of light you would normally use in really, really close for dialogue scenes. So in those cases, having it a little farther away generally becomes a non-issue as far as noise from the fan is concerned. Just something you thought you should be aware of if you were planning to use this in, say you do a lot of corporate filming and you work a lot in tiny little offices, probably not the right light for you. I think something more in the 300 range, the Aputure 300 series, or maybe even one of the 120s would be a better fit for those smaller spaces that you're working in. But when it comes to lighting bigger, in a bigger space, that's where the 600C really shines. Now, onto the fun stuff. Let's talk about how we're making this background. I have had multiple questions of this over last little bit, somebody called this my hippie mushroom background. Whether you love it or hate it, understanding how to do it is not a bad thing. So let me just kind of run through how this works. And the context in which I use it, just to kind of set the groundwork there, is when I'm doing microphone reviews, as one example, which we did recently. When I am recording raw samples from the microphone that I'm reviewing, plus a couple of others that I'm comparing to, what's really helpful is to be able to provide some sort of visual cue when we switch from one microphone sample to another. And so what this allows me to do very quickly and easily is switch the colors so there's a very clear visual cue. Now, I could do this in the past, and oftentimes what I would do is I would film myself or whoever was talking into the microphone as a silhouette, and I would shoot a white light up onto the backdrop, and then I could, in post, I could really use some extreme grades to differentiate between the different microphone samples. But this makes it even easier for me, and I can use interesting patterns like this. So how do I do this? In this case, again, I'm using the Aputure Spotlight mount, which is an ellipsoidal lens system, which makes the light beam very, very focusable, and it allows you to use gobos to create these interesting patterns. So what's a gobo? It's a piece of metal or glass with patterns that the light shines through, and with the ellipsoidal lens, casts a lighted pattern. So that's what you're seeing here. So in this case, I'm using a glass gobo. It has a bunch of different little pieces of glass fragments of different colors, and that's what creates this pattern in the background. So again, I can go ahead and change the RGB values, the hue, saturation, and intensity, or if I want to use RGB, I can do that. If I want to, set a red, green, or blue value, or I can use XY as well. So however you prefer working to dial in those different colors. And that way it makes it also very repeatable. Of course, you can set presets. And this makes it just really, really easy to provide those visual cues for when you're switching from one microphone to another in my particular case. So you could use it in creative ways for things like that. Now, I am using the original Spotlight mount, which is not optimized for these much bigger lights in the 600 series. I am told, however, by Aputure that they're working on a Spotlight mount for the bigger lights. Now, what's the difference? Why does that matter? If you have a bigger light emitting single point, which you do on the 600 series, especially the 600C, that means that the optics in the Spotlight mount, of the original Spotlight mount, are not really optimized for it. And while it works like it does here, it's not as efficient as it possibly could be. In other words, turning the light to a certain intensity or changing the dimmer to a certain intensity doesn't get you necessarily as much light as a fully optimized ellipsoidal will. So that's what the new Spotlight mount will do when that comes out. So looking forward to that one as well. Now let's take a look at another use case here. This is kind of a fun feature as well. What if you're shooting a narrative film and you have a scene in a club or a bar and you want to sync the light to the music to give that kind of that vibe for the club? You can actually do that, and you use the Sidus Link app, which is the Bluetooth mesh control system for the Aputure lights. Pretty much all of the Aputure lights that have been produced in the last 3 years or so can be controlled by the Sidus Link app. The Sidus Link app runs on iPad. It also runs on iOS phones or Android phones, and it allows you to do this really interesting thing. We use the iPad here, and it allows you to do something called music effects. So how does this work? First of all, you open the project to which you want to add music effects. You navigate to the FX menu and choose music effects. You import the music you'd like to sync your light to. And currently the app supports up to 2 minutes of audio. So there is a limitation there. Hopefully we'll see that increase in the future. What happens is the app will analyze your audio and recommend some presets. Of course, you can adjust the frequency range of the audio and how the lights respond to that. And you can also tell it the beats per minute for the music. If it didn't necessarily pick it up perfectly, you can tune that in if you need to do that as well. So once the audio is loaded in, you can program your colors of choice to different frequencies in your audio clip under color mapping, and you can also choose mapping presets. I actually found that it did pretty well on most of the songs on its own, so didn't really have to tweak it a whole lot, but if you wanted to, you can. Additional options include choosing between HSI, which is hue, saturation, and intensity. So again, RGB colors, you choose the hue, which is the color, the saturation is how saturated it is, and the intensity is how, bright, or it's basically a dimmer control. You can do it that way, or if you wanted to do a color temperature, so if you wanted to keep it as a white light, but maybe change it between warm and cool, you can do that as well. Throughout this process, you can preview what's happening here by pressing the play button, and you can also adjust the program saturation, beats per minute. Again, the AI beats per minute did pretty well, and you can also change the interval, the speed, or how often it reacts, I guess, to basically the tempo or the beat of the song. And then, of course, once you're happy with it, you can save it, and it's all set to go for your filming session. Now, we've only scratched the surface here. I hope that was helpful for you. I am super excited about the direction that Aputure is going. What is really exciting to me is that not only are they catering to the higher end of the market now, and in fact, recently, one of my friends who worked on a Warner Brothers piece called me and said, "Hey, Curtis, can you get me in touch with Aputure? We're going to be shooting this piece. We'd love to have a Nova 600, P600C." And they were having a hard time sourcing one, and they were able to use that in that piece. So that's to me, it's just like, wow, this is a world of difference from when I first reviewed the very first Lightstorm LED panel from Aputure in 2015. And now they're producing lights that are actually being used on these multi-million-dollar productions. Pretty impressive. So I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.